Hi, my name's Henry. I'm a former wealth manager and economist, now based here in Switzerland, and here's how this will affect you. So Reform UK's manifesto proposes over 90 billion in tax cuts, combined with 50 billion in additional spending. And they estimate they will make this up by cutting £150 billion from UK government spending currently. The IFS have taken a careful look at this plan, and here is their quote. Spending reductions would save less than stated, and tax cuts would cost more than stated by a margin of tens of billions of pounds a year. In short, the boffins that we hired to make sure the maths adds up say Nigel cannot do maths. Before I get into the rest of the mechanisms, just for some context on the 150 billion in cuts. That's approximately half of the cost annually to run the NHS, just half of it, or half of the welfare budget, which one half of it is already just pensions. So which half are you cutting, Nigel? I want to take you back for a tangible lesson in when the maths doesn't add up. Do you all remember Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng? In 2022 September, they proposed a mini-budget with unfunded tax cuts of £45 billion. Within a week of announcing their mini-budget, the rate that we pay on our national debt, the gilt yield, jumped by over a full percentage point. A large number of pension funds that rely on a leveraged version of this gilt rate nearly defaulted, and the Bank of England had to actually intervene in the bond market to ensure there wasn't a full collapse. The average 2-year fixed mortgage went from 4.5% to 6%, and that added on average about £300 to the average £200,000 mortgage. Within 49 days, she had resigned, lasting less time than a head of lettuce. Here, I'm going to explain very carefully how this all relates and how this all connects. Banks, when they price your mortgage, whether it's fixed or variable, usually reference the SONIA rate. The SONIA rate is a mix. It's what banks pay effectively to swap a variable rate for a fixed rate. The SONIA rate is affected by two things. One of them is the gilt rate, the long-term lending rate for UK government debt that we mentioned before. The other one is the volatility. That's why when the gilt rate jumps by 1%, your mortgage will jump by about 1% as well, depending on how fast that jump is. Reform's plan, and their planned cuts, is a large factor greater than what Kwarteng and Liz Truss wanted to put through. So, have a guess what you think will happen to the market for gilts if they try and implement this plan. This plan from Reform will add a significant portion to the price of your mortgage almost immediately. What happens then? Now, Reform also want to get rid of the Renters' Rights Bill. That means that they can change the price of a rent almost immediately. This means that when the mortgage rate goes up on these landlords, they can pass it straight on to the renters. If this rate spikes, the ability to pay for mortgages will be impaired, which means that we may also see mortgage defaults. Now, if this rate jumps, there will also be a reduction in the amount of people who are able to get a mortgage, which means that not many people will be even able to buy a property, which means the demand for property will be going down. Now, if a lot of these mortgages default at the same time, this will affect the balance sheets of the banks. These are generally quite liquid, and we have new regulation which means they hold more cash than they used to in 2008, but it will not be great for them. If the banks are concerned about lending, they will start restricting it. Now, if they restrict lending, that won't only just affect the mortgages, that will affect commercial lending. Now, businesses loan money for quite a large number of reasons. However, if that lending becomes more expensive, they cannot invest more, they cannot buy new property, they cannot expand, and for some of them, they can't engage in trade financing, invoice financing, and that hits their bottom line. They become less profitable, which means that they'll hire less people, and it slows down hiring growth. Other than this, if the gilt rate itself spikes because the market is spooked because we can't fund these cuts, the actual rate that the government pays on its interest will eventually increase. Right now, we pay £100 billion a year just in interest. If this rate goes up, that number will also go up, which means you'll have less fiscal headroom to actually spend on anything you want to spend on. Last factor to consider here is then about our currency. Now, if international investors are spooked by the idea that the government can't pay its bills, that commercial lending is being restricted, and that there is a difficulty in making a profit in the UK, they will simply sell these assets. They will sell them, receive pounds, and they will trade that back to their home currency. So that means there'll be an increased supply of the pound, a lower demand for the pound, which means the value of the pound will go down. The difficulty there is that if the currency depreciates, the UK is a net food importer, and we're a net importer on almost everything. So the cost of all of your goods and services, because our currency will be depreciating, will go up. That will be translated as inflation in most of the things that you want to buy on a day-to-day basis. And do you know what happens when the inflation rate goes up? The Bank of England hikes rates to try and slow down the inflation. So that then translates back into the lending cost, back into the restriction of commercial lending, and you start to get a feedback loop where we end up tightening our credit over and over because of this inflation-linked feedback. You end up in a very, very bad loop, which does not end well for us as a country. In short, international investors are already looking at these manifestos to decide where they will position their bets, and right now, if reform goes in, those bets are 100% against the UK and against the pound. The general reply to this from the people behind reform will be that the tax cuts will introduce new consumption, people will be able to go out and spend more, and that will then be translated into the economy, and then from there back into taxes, and it will pay for itself. No, it won't. The majority of these tax cuts are actually on higher earners with a lower marginal propensity to consume, which we made a video on before. So, when they receive these tax cuts, they're not going to spend all of that tax cut. And so the value that we're cutting away from the Treasury will not translate back into new spending directly. So, in short, Nigel cannot do maths. None of this is costed, it will impact you directly, there will be no savings, it will translate through your mortgage, through your rent, and through a restriction of business activity in the country. Financial markets work on sound maths. They do not work on patriotism, they do not work on political lines that are catchy, they work on the hard maths. If you want to know where the smart money goes, if reform got into power, it would be against sterling, it would be against our banks, and against our yields. So ironically, for any reform voter who is still considering voting for Nigel Farage, the funny outcome will be that the only person who will benefit from Nigel Farage's current fiscal policies will be a number of international foreign investors betting against the outcomes of the country. All the reform voters who understand that reform is in reality a protest vote. I can understand and I can sympathise. I also hate the way that we have been governed for the last 20 years. But pushing forward Nigel's back-of-the-napkin maths that will smash the sovereign currency is not exactly a recipe to fix that.